Hello, Internet. My name is Ryan Ingram, and today we're going to talk about everything you need to know about seller financing. This is going to include what is seller financing, the pros and cons of seller financing from both the buyer and the seller side. We're going to go over the key components of seller financing, how to find it, how to structure it, and lastly, how to ask for it. So I think all of these are extraordinarily important components of seller financing, especially if you are looking at building a real estate portfolio pretty quickly. If you have been in real estate or researching it at all for any length of time, you'll quickly realize that traditional financing gets a little bit hairy once you start building a sizable portfolio, especially if you're in your first 2 years as a real estate investor, where banks aren't going to want to count that rental income as actual income because you don't have 2 years experience. So using creative financing like seller financing can be a real boost once you understand it, and it can be a value add to the person looking to sell the real estate. So let's go ahead and get started and discuss what is seller financing. Now, I want to be clear in that seller financing is simple once you understand what makes it up. So in real estate, seller financing is just as simple as the person that currently owns the property, they're going to act as the bank. So you're going to agree to purchase a property from them. And rather than going to the bank or someone else for a loan, you're just going to ask the seller to finance this property for you. And it's just that simple, buying a piece of real estate without including a traditional bank. So, for the pros and cons, let's start with the buyer. And quite honestly, I think there's only pros when it comes to seller financing on the buyer's side. It's a real boost and leg up for you. So, the pros, obviously, you get to circumvent the bank, which means if you haven't been in real estate for 2 years or more, or if you don't have good credit, if you don't fit the mold that most traditional banks want, then seller finance is very helpful for you. You're going to be able to circumvent the bank, buy real estate, and then refinance with the traditional lenders as you're working on meeting their criteria. Now, I really can't come up with any cons for seller financing from the buyer's side because it's just such a boost. Now, I suppose if you were to try to scale seller financing, it gets pretty difficult because seller financing is 100% relationship based, and finding a significant number of people that all love you, support you, and want to see you succeed enough to give you a lot of properties on seller financing. Now, that's a tall order. So, this is a great way to build your portfolio in the beginning. But as soon as you fit traditional banking criteria, it will probably be easier for you to then transition and mostly use traditional financing or start converting these people that are giving you seller financing to private lenders later on down the road. Now, on the seller side, I will say that I think there are some cons, but let's start with the pros for the sellers. Now, if you are a high income earner, or if you've owned these properties for a very long time and you are potentially looking at a tax bill if you were to sell these properties, then seller financing is going to allow you to make those taxes on the income as these payments are being made. So you're not going to have a really big tax bill to start. This is going to allow you to kind of defer that down the road. Now, I'm not a CPA, and for your exact situation, you would definitely do yourself a solid by seeking the professional counsel of a CPA for your particular situation and how doing seller financing on one of your properties is going to benefit you. The next value that I would say that you would be bringing is you are likely going to positively impact whoever's buying this property's financial life. And as much as real estate at the end of the day is about making money and having a really good ROI, there is definitely an element of teaching the next generation and giving somebody a leg up or a competitive edge as you see someone working really hard, very diligently to improve their life and to build their portfolio. So I have had a lot of fantastic interactions and really found some fantastic mentorship as I have purchased properties from other real estate investors that are further along their journey than I am. And I have learned so much from them. It's invaluable, and I'm super supportive or super appreciative of that. So The feel-good factor for seller financing from the seller side has to go on that pros list. Now, as far as the cons go, I will say that if you have the opportunity to just sell it outright, then that is probably the best way to go because you're not going to have any like lagging exposure. You are going to have the property that you're very familiar with as collateral. However, if you turn this property over to someone and let them manage it and they just run it out, they add a bunch of deferred maintenance to it, they put a bad tenant in there, then you have all of the exposure. They could tear the property up and they could cause more in damages than you could collect from them in the financing aspect. So you have all the exposure and you run the risk of getting your property back in worse condition than you handed it off. Now, there are some obvious safeguards that you could put in place to minimize the ability of this happening. However, it is still a risk and it is still an exposure that should be considered whenever you are thinking about doing seller financing for someone. So I got to say that my recommendation is usually going to be in the event you have the ability to sell the property outright, that's going to be the quickest, the easiest, and the cleanest thing to do. But now that we've covered that, let's go over the two ways that you can structure seller financing. Now, the first way is a land contract. If you're not familiar with a land contract, it's pretty much like the old school Kmart layaway program for rental properties. So the ownership of the property won't actually change until that land contract is satisfied. So whatever terms that you come up with, let's use a hypothetical property. Let's say that the purchase price is $100,000 and it's going to have a 2-year balloon payment. And in the meantime, it's going to be interest only payments at 12%. So that's $1,000 per month, 12% annual, and it's interest only. So none of that principal is being paid down. So at the end of that 2-year balloon payment, that $100,000 is due and payable immediately. So during these first 2 years, that deed is still going to be in your name. The insurance policy still needs to be in your name. The taxes still need to be paid by you, or it needs to be outlined in the land contract. And this is not going to change until that 2-year balloon payment is made and that land contract is consequently satisfied. So as soon as you receive your money in full and you're satisfied, then that deed transfers. Now, it is possible to record a land contract with the county or either the auditor or recorder. I think each municipality is different. And recording that land contract just makes it a little bit more safe or secure on the buyer side so that they have the comfort in knowing that you won't turn around, sell the property out from under them, or do another land contract with someone else. Now, most people are way above that, but unfortunately, the bad actors around, sometimes that does happen. So if you are going to structure a land contract for both the buyer and the seller's sake, I would definitely recommend recording this land contract, even though that deed won't transfer. Now, also keep in mind that in order to release that land contract or get it off the history of the title, if this goes sideways, the land contract, both the buyer and the seller need to sign off on that release and then release this from that title down with the same municipal entity that you recorded it with in the first place. We have had a couple of deals fall through here recently because the deal went sideways with a land contract and it was never properly released. So it clouded the title. And the only way that we would purchase it is with an exception to that, which we didn't want to do because we didn't want anyone to come back later on claiming that they were entitled to that property. Just a side note, I would like to mention that some banks are not that familiar with land contracts. So if you are going to refinance to pay off that balloon payment, then if you're using like a bank that's going to resell to Fannie or Freddie, you might have a little bit of speed bumps here and there in order to get this to the closing table and explaining that land contract to the people that are originating the loans. However, I found that on the commercial side of the house, if you're talking to a credit union, if it's a small one and you're talking to the vice president of commercial lending or something like that, they seem to be pretty familiar with land contracts. And we have refinanced a couple of those without any issue. But just keep that in mind if this is the route that you're going to take. So the second way to structure a seller finance deal is through a typical promissory note and first position mortgage. So in this manner, the deed is going to transfer immediately. So as soon as purchase price and the terms are agreed upon, you're going to go to a title company. They're going to run the title, make sure everything's good. And then once you get the clear to close, you're going to close on the property. The deed then transfers to the buyer's name. Now, this is a lot more clear cut. It looks more like a typical transaction, especially on the recorder's side and on the auditor's website. It's pretty standard. And then the promissory note with the rates and terms that the buyer and seller agreed upon, that's going to be signed, executed at closing, and then a first position mortgage that collateralizes the promissory note is going to be recorded on that property. So you're going to have the first position mortgage or the first position lien on that property. Now, while land contracts may be easier to default on and just release, this promissory note and first position mortgage arrangement is going to require the seller who's financing the property to really function like a bank. So in the event that this loan defaults and the buyer doesn't hold up his end of this transaction, then you're going to actually have to foreclose on the property, just as a bank would if someone stopped paying their mortgage. However, it's my opinion that this is a cleaner way to do things and it fits the mold just like any other real estate transaction. So, as I mentioned with a land contract, how you might have some speed bumps if you're going to put this on a 30-year low interest rate Fannie Freddie loan, this is not going to require too much explanation or too much training on how to appropriately think about or get this transaction to the closing table. Those are the two ways to structure a seller finance deal: your land contract and then a promissory note and first position mortgage. Now that we've discussed that, let's move on to the key components of seller finance transactions. Now, just like any other real estate transaction, you're going to have your purchase price. To some people, this is the most important part, and a lot of seller finance transactions have a lot of solid negotiation that you can do around this purchase price if it's the most important thing to the seller. The second is the terms. What percent interest are you going to pay in the meantime? Is it going to be interest only or is it going to be amortized? And lastly, you've got duration. Now, the duration of this seller financed, the terms, you could have a balloon payment and you also have an amortization period. So if you want to just collect interest only payments, that would be the easiest from an accounting and from a payoff statement whenever that balloon payment hits. That'll be the easiest to do. But if you want to amortize this, you have to decide how long of an amortization period do you want to have. We have some amortization periods with private lenders or seller finance deals as low as 8 years, and we have some as high as 30 years. It's really whatever the seller and buyer decide. Now, a good rule of thumb that I've heard is that when it comes to seller finance transactions, you can have your purchase price or you can have your terms, but not both. So if you're in the process of negotiating seller financing, I would just figure out what is most important to the seller, or if you're the seller, what's most important to the buyer. And I think one of you should have the purchase price and one of you should have the terms. So if the buyer is looking for a really low purchase price, but then he should be willing to pay a very high interest rate. And if the seller wants a very high purchase price, then he should carry very low interest rates. In the Sequence of Mastermind, we have one gentleman who is in that group and has negotiated a lot of seller finance deals. And one thing that he has had a lot of luck with, especially here lately, is even though interest rates are 5, 6, sometimes 8%, depending on the loan product that you choose, he gives the sellers the purchase price that they want, and then he negotiates a very low interest rate. So on his last deal, he paid above market on paper for the purchase price. However, he negotiated a 2% interest amortized over 30 years without a balloon payment. And that's a pretty powerful position to be in because you're paying so much principal off with each payment that you make just at 2% and amortized over 30 years. So that is kind of the gist as to how this negotiation should flow. So again, the key components of seller finance transactions are the purchase price, the terms, which mean the interest rate, and then you have the option to have a balloon payment, or you can just decide the duration of that amortized period. And that's it. Those are pretty much the four components of seller finance transactions. So now let's talk about how to find seller finance deals. Now, I want to point out first and foremost that this is 100% relationship driven. So if you are a buyer in the market and looking for seller finance transactions, then you would be very, very well off to start networking with other real estate investors and trying to find people that have problems that you could solve via seller financing. So, as a buyer, you're going to want to kind of create these problems in your head where your seller financed desires or you putting together this deal will solve their problem. So, some examples of this are tired landlords, right? Somebody that has just been in this game for a really long time. Life is catching up to them. They're tired. They just are sick of turning these properties after they're trashed. They're tired of hearing excuse after excuse as to why the rent is late, and just all of these things that you commonly hear as cons when you're looking into real estate investing. Try to find those people and then pitch seller financing to them. But again, keep in mind that this is all relationship based. So you're going to want to put in a decent amount of time building rapport and figuring out how you can solve this individual's problem so that it is well, your ask for seller financing is well received. So I know I said all that, and you might be thinking, well, how can I find these tired landlords? And that is where Propstream comes in. So let's pull up that. All right, so this is Propstream. This is what it looks like whenever you first log in. Now, Propstream is a service that I use on a daily basis. Every single deal that I come across, I run through Propstream. And now it's capable of so many things. I use this to run all of my comps, regardless of whether I found the deal on Propstream or not. However, as we're going to see and walk through here today, it allows you to pull up so much detailed data so quickly that you're going to be able to generate a list of people that are likely going to be interested in seller financing you some deals. Now, keep in mind, again, it's relationship based and it's all a numbers game. So if you want to get 5 seller finance deals, you might have to reach out to 100 people, maybe even 500 people. So having this much data at your fingertips is a really good idea. Now, in the description below is a 7-day free trial to Propstream. I would highly recommend that you do that. Now, I would plan it to where you've got 7 days where you can lean in really hard and figure out if this software is for you. I think it is. And if you use this link, I get a little bit of a kickback since I am an affiliate. And I would very much so appreciate that, especially since I'm in the middle of rehabbing an abandoned mansion, which if you haven't checked out that series, please do, because I'm sure I'm in for a lot of surprises. So the first thing you're going to want to do is put in a property that you are interested in. So we can just do all of Dayton, Ohio. Now you're going to see this button here that says filter, and you're going to be presented with a bunch of different options. They've got some quick list choices, some high equity. That's about what we're looking for, really, because people that have high equity are going to be more likely to accept these seller finance propositions. So we don't really want them to be owner occupied. We don't really mind if the building is either occupied or vacant. Property characteristics, we're looking for seller finance deals. So that has everything to do with the owner, not much to do with the property. So we're going to go down here to ownership info. And, we're going to want somebody that might be tired. So let's put in 10 years of minimum ownership. As far as that goes, individual, corporate, mixed trust doesn't really matter. We don't really mind the last sales date. Now, number of properties owned, this is something that you can play with. If you want to try and find or focus on people that have a lot of properties so that you might be able to get an entire portfolio seller financed, then play with this. Let's say, 5 properties is the minimum. That way, as you're negotiating this, you know that they have 5. So you're not going to necessarily need to educate them on this entire seller financed process. They're probably already pretty familiar with it. Now, the next, we're going to want to look at the valuation and equity. Now, this is something that you're just going to need to play around with. You can do the estimated equity. You can put in a dollar amount, or you can put in just a percentage. So if we went with, let's say, 70% equity, that's going to add that to the filter, and we're going to be able to see these properties. So just like that, that is done. You could even come down here and say, no minimum or no mortgages. That would put them at 100% equity though. So that might be a little bit redundant. Again, you could play with these and you could really pinpoint and all of the problems that you could come up with that would cause somebody to be receptive of seller financing. You can pretty much create those situations here inside of Propstream. So that's a really, really cool feature, is how much data they have access to and the fact that they let you filter it down so much. So after we filtered everything out, we see that there are 10,408 properties that fit that criteria. Now you can go through these and analyze them. You can, as soon as you click on one, so 28 Belpre, Dayton, Ohio 45403. You can see the beds, baths, square footage, lot size, property details. You see Crossroad Dwellings LLC. You can see their mailing address. So here, now we know that they're local. They don't live very far. And you can also check out this. So since we put that 5 property minimum, we can check out this linked properties, and we should see more than 5. So there's a total of 11 total properties owned. They have no loans on any of them, which is really impressive. And they have $1.2 million worth of equity. Now, I do want to point out that the way that Propstream does this is based on the mailing address. So you might come across somebody that has set up an LLC using a registered agent that is an attorney, and that attorney might have, hundreds of clients that they're the registered agent for. Because the mailing address goes to that registered agent, you're going to get all of that attorney's clients' properties are going to come back to that address. Or if it's just a common address that has a lot of suites inside of it, you might have a little bit of inaccuracy in this total number of properties owned. And here with Propstream, I mean, you can see all these properties that are owned. You can analyze them individually. And you could even, once you get this information, do a skip trace on this organization and figure out who the registered agent is and how you can contact them. As soon as you get a name that accompanies this, you'll be able to pull a phone number and you can text them and try and build that rapport. And this is also, again, just a good networking tool, because whether you do buy these properties or not, you now know, and you're going to gain the contact information from somebody that has 11 properties. If you're somebody that doesn't have 11 properties, this is a good person for you to build a relationship with and a good person for you to learn from, regardless of whether or not you actually do a seller finance transaction. Now, as we've been going over how to find seller financing, keep in mind that we were only looking at the high equity or the long-term ownership. That is what we filtered out in Propstream first. There's a dozen other scenarios that you can come up with, get creative, and brainstorm all the different ways that you could be of value add to this individual, and just paint out those different circumstances. So you could find someone who, bought some online courses, listened to Bigger Pockets, listened to some podcasts, really educated themselves on real estate. They hopped in, they were a high net worth individual. They bought 50, 60 properties, and they quickly realized that they don't like the problems that come along with real estate investing. Now, they don't necessarily need to be a long-term or high equity investor in order for you to negotiate some type of seller finance deal, especially if they are oriented or they are very focused on that monthly cash flow. So in theory, even if somebody just recently purchased properties, you can negotiate some type of seller financing that includes a monthly payment amount that's higher than all of their payments, and they can keep their underlying mortgages in your seller financing. That way you would gain control of the properties, and you would start being able to keep the books, manage those properties, and build up your rapport and your track record, so that whenever you approach a traditional bank later on, you've got evidence that you are in fact a very good operator and you are worthy of them loaning you enough money to take over these properties fully and pay off the initial mortgage or that initial seller financing, however you arranged it. And lastly, how to ask for seller financing. Now, put on your tough mental cap as you are going out looking for these deals, utilizing Propstream to find these high equity or long-term ownership homes, and realize and constantly remind yourself that this is a numbers game. So again, if you want to get 5, 10 deals this year seller financed, you need to mentally prepare yourself to ask for 500 to 1,000 different people if they would be interested in entertaining seller financing. Now, you're going to get a higher success rate the more research that you do on the front end and the more time you spend building that relationship and figuring out how them doing this for you is going to solve some of their problems. So I would very unashamedly just go ahead and get into the rhythm of each deal you analyze. Go ahead and either ask the listing agent or ask the owner if they would be willing to entertain seller financing. Now, if they are, go ahead and start your analysis, figure out what you can do. And remember that the key negotiating points are the purchase price and the corresponding terms. And always, always strive to make it favorable for both parties. You want the seller to be your biggest fan at the end of this transaction because birds of a feather, they flock together. As lame as it sounds, it's true. And these people likely have real estate investor friends or a network of other people that they know, and you could potentially solve their problem as well. And it just does the soul good to help people solve problems, especially if you're able to profit and build generational wealth as a consequence of you helping that person out. So don't cut corners. Don't try and get greedy. Don't try and make everything in favor of you. That's no way to do business, and you're going to burn yourself out. And these real estate investing circles, they're very small. Everybody knows everybody, and you don't want to put a bad blemish on your reputation because it's going to be detrimental to you as you try to grow in your community. And it's just not a good long-term strategy. Now, I hope this video was helpful. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in the comments. Now, I go live every Friday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time where I answer any and all questions about personal finance and real estate investing. So if you've got any questions from this video, please join us there. If not, I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks.